The silence before the storm. Before we begin this reckoning, ensure you are part of the movement for truth. If you believe accountability matters more than a punchline, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the power of modern satire. Your engagement ensures these stories reach those who need to hear them most. The green room of the Ed Sullivan Theater was a cathedral of manufactured comfort. The air was chilled to a precise temperature, the scent of expensive lilies fought the faint, metallic tang of stage makeup, and the lighting was designed to make every guest look like a winner before they stepped out to be sacrificed. Karoline Leavitt stood in the center of the room, a silent statue amidst a whirlwind of frantic activity. A production assistant hovered near her left shoulder, offering a sparkling water she hadn't touched. A makeup artist reached toward her with a powder puff, but Karoline's eyes never left the monitor mounted on the wall. On the screen, Steven Colbert was mid-monologue. The blue-hued glow of the screen washed over Karoline's face, highlighting the steady, unblinking focus in her gaze. She wasn't watching a comedy show, she was watching a strategic deployment of narrative. Colbert leaned into the microphone, his smirk practiced and sharp, as he delivered a line about bedtime prayers and propaganda. The audience erupted, a wave of laughter that sounded to Karoline's ears more like a reflex than a genuine emotion. "He's really laying it on tonight," the producer whispered, his voice laced with a mixture of apology and warning. "You know, Karoline, the invitation was for a conversation, but if you feel the environment has become unproductive, we can pivot, we can cut the segment, we don't want a scene." Karoline finally turned her head. Her expression was a mask of terrifying calm. "A scene is exactly what Steven has spent the last 10 minutes creating," she said, her voice a low, melodic contrast to the booming audio of the television. "He isn't afraid of a scene, he's afraid of a response he can't edit." She looked back at the screen just as the applause sign flashed, reflected in Colbert's glasses. To the millions watching at home, it was late-night entertainment, a harmless tradition of mocking the powerful. To Karoline, it was the sound of a safety net being woven, a way for a man with a microphone to say anything he wanted and hide behind the word satire the moment anyone asked for a fact. The door to the green room opened, and the muffled, rhythmic thumping of the house band's bass line bled into the room. It was the heartbeat of the machine. "30 seconds, Miss Leavitt," the stage manager called out, his headset blowing in the dim hall. Karoline didn't check her hair, she didn't adjust her suit, she simply exhaled, a slow, controlled release of tension that left her centered and dangerous. She wasn't going out there to be a prop in his skit, she was going out there to turn the mirror around. As she stepped into the darkened hallway leading to the stage, the producer reached out one last time. "Just try to keep it light. It works better if you laugh along." Karoline paused at the edge of the curtain, the bright, hot lights of the stage already licking at her shoes. "I'll laugh when he says something that's actually true." Then she stepped into the light. "This is only the beginning of the confrontation. Do you think the 'it's just a joke' defense still works in 2026? Let us know in the comments. The transition from the darkness of the wings to the stage was a physical blow. The heat of the studio lights, calibrated to a blinding intensity, pressed against Karoline's skin, while the house band's brass section wailed a jazz-infused greeting that felt more like a warning than a welcome. "Please welcome the White House press secretary herself, Karoline Leavitt." Colbert's voice boomed over the speakers, seasoned with that specific brand of irony that suggested his hospitality was itself a joke. Karoline walked out, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a steady, metronomic precision. She didn't wave to the crowd like a politician seeking a vote. She walked with the posture of a person entering a negotiation where the stakes were nothing less than the truth. As she reached the desk, Colbert stood, his suit sharp, his grin sharper. He extended a hand, leaning in just enough for his microphone to catch the low, performative warmth of his voice. "All in good fun, right?" he whispered, his eyes scanning hers for the expected flicker of submission. Karoline took his hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. "Fun is one word for it, Steven," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Let's see if we can find a few others." They sat. The audience, a sea of faces half hidden in the shadows, simmered with a restless energy. Some were there to see a gladiator match, others were there to see a punchline confirmed. Colbert shuffled his blue cue cards with the practiced flourish of a card shark. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, the image of a man in total command of his territory. "So, Karoline," he began, his tone sliding into that familiar, mock-serious register. "You saw the monologue, you heard the jokes. I have to ask, is it exhausting being the person who has to tell the American people that the sky isn't blue just because the administration says it's ultraviolet?" The audience let out a collective "ooh," followed by a ripple of laughter. It was a classic Colbert opening, a framed insult wrapped in a metaphor designed to make the guest defend a position they never held. Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't offer the polite, self-deprecating chuckle that usually signaled a guest's willingness to be the evening's toy. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her hands folded on the desk, his desk, and waited for the laughter to die down completely. She waited until the silence became heavy, until the audience members began to shift in their seats, uncomfortable with the lack of a scripted response. "Steven," she said, her voice cutting through the residual noise like a blade through silk. "There's an old rule in this business. Satire is supposed to punch up. It's supposed to challenge the powerful on behalf of the people. But tonight, Steven, you spent 10 minutes mocking the faith and the intelligence of millions of people who don't have a platform like this one. That's not satire." She paused, her gaze locked onto his, refusing to let him look away to the teleprompter. "That's character assassination, and you're doing it because it's easier to laugh at a caricature than it is to engage with a fact." The air seemed to leave the room, the applause sign remained dark, and for the first time in years, the band leader didn't have a musical sting ready. Colbert's grin tightened, the edges of it fraying. He blinked, the rhythm he had mastered over decades suddenly fractured. "Oh, come on," Colbert said, his chuckle sounding slightly forced, a defensive reflex. "It's a comedy show. We're on a stage, not in the briefing room. People come here to lighten up." "People come here to be told what to think by someone who pretends he's only joking. Tonight, Steven, the safety net is gone." She reached into her folder and moved a single sheet of paper to the center of the desk, a white flag of challenge in the middle of his polished wood sanctuary. The camera cut to a close-up of Colbert. For the first time that night, he wasn't looking at the audience. He was looking at her. The line in the sand hadn't just been drawn, it had been crossed. The tension is rising, and the script has been thrown out the window. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the battle for credibility, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're witnessing the shift in real time, make sure to like this video and subscribe. We are uncovering the moment the narrative broke. Don't miss the conclusion. Tell us in the comments, is "it's just a joke" a valid excuse for misinformation? Let's get into the heart of the confrontation. The studio felt smaller now. The vast, cavernous space of the Ed Sullivan Theater, usually filled with the booming ego of late-night television, seemed to shrink until only the two of them existed within the tight circle of the spotlight. Steven Colbert looked down at the single sheet of paper Karoline had placed on his desk. It wasn't a prop, it wasn't a joke, it was evidence. "What's this?" Colbert asked, his voice attempting a playful lilt, though the muscles in his jaw remained taut. "A list of people I'm not allowed to tease anymore? A comedy permit?" He looked toward the audience, waiting for the familiar roar of approval to rescue him, but the crowd was caught in a strange, magnetic stasis. They weren't laughing at his deflection, They were waiting to see if he would actually read what was on the page. "It's a transcript, Steven," Karoline said, her voice calm, devoid of the theatrical anger he was used to parrying. "It's a record of the claims you made in your monologue tonight, claims presented as punchlines but delivered as truths. You told your audience that the administration is ignoring the working class, while your own writers ignored the 3 bills we passed this month specifically for them. You mocked a spokesperson's faith because you couldn't find a flaw in her logic." Colbert leaned back, his fingers interlocking over his stomach, a defensive posture masked as casual indifference. Karoline," he sighed, the disappointed teacher persona clicking into place. "This is what we call a bit. You're fact-checking a comedy routine. That's like trying to calculate the wind resistance on a rubber chicken. You're missing the point." "No," Karoline replied, leaning closer, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made the camera operators zoom in without being told. "I'm highlighting the point. You use the rubber chicken to distract people while you slide a political narrative into their living rooms. You spent 3 minutes tonight making the country feel like anyone who disagrees with you is a caricature. That's not a bit, that's an agenda." Colbert's thumb capped rhythmically against his mug. The rhythm of the show, the setup, the jab, the roar, was completely dead. The silence in the room was no longer uncomfortable, it was expectant. The audience members were leaning forward, their faces illuminated by the glow of the stage, no longer passive consumers, but active witnesses. You built a career calling out hypocrisy. You became a household name by speaking truth to power. But somewhere along the way, you became the power, and tonight you used that power to punch down at people who are just trying to survive the policies you find so amusing. Colbert opened his mouth to pivot, his eyes flickering toward the wings where a producer was frantically gesturing to go to commercial. He saw the break cue, but for the first time in his career, he felt like walking away would be an admission of defeat. "I challenge power every night," he said, his voice finally rising, the mask of the comedian slipping to reveal the irritation of a man who wasn't used to being questioned on his own turf. "No," Karoline said, her voice a cool, sharp contrast to his heat. "You challenge the people you've been told to dislike. Tonight, I'm challenging you. And the reason you're not joking anymore, Steven, is because you know I'm right." The room stayed silent, not a cough, not a murmur. The desk between them, once a platform for performance, had become a witness stand. Karoline didn't move, she didn't smirk, she simply waited, leaving the ghost of his last failed joke to hang in the air between them like a question that had no answer. The walls are closing in, and the master of the monologue is running out of lines. If you want to see the moment the safety net finally snaps, stay tuned. The safety net fails. The mask is off, and the studio lights have never been colder. If you're seeing the moment the comedy died and the truth took over, show your support. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We are entering the final rounds. Who do you think is really in control of the room right now? Tell us in the comments. The tension in the Ed Sullivan Theater had reached a point of physical density. It was no longer a television set. It was a vacuum. Steven Colbert straightened his tie, a gesture of nervous habit that betrayed the calculated ease he usually projected. He looked at the camera, then back at Karoline, his eyes narrowing. The fun was gone. The bits were exhausted. All that remained was a man and a woman in a high-stakes struggle for the narrative. "You people love playing the victim," Colbert said, his voice finally shedding its comedic lilt for a hard, defensive edge. "Every joke is an attack. Every criticism is unfair. You come onto a comedy show and act like you're being led to the gallows because we dared to point out the absurdity of your rhetoric. It's a classic deflection, Karoline. If you can't defend the policy, attack the comedian." I'm not attacking the comedian, Steven, Karoline replied, her voice remaining at that same haunting, level pitch. You didn't mock a policy tonight. You mocked motive. You didn't challenge an argument. You questioned the very humanity and intelligence of the people who believe in it. That's not absurdity. That's narrative control. She leaned in, her shadow stretching across the desk, overlapping his. And the reason it didn't get the laugh you wanted, the reason the room feels the way it does right now, is because people are tired of being lectured by someone who pretends he isn't lecturing them. They're tired of the "it's just a joke" safety net. Colbert scoffed, a sharp, dry sound. I've been doing this for decades. I know my audience. I know what they want. You knew what they wanted 10 years ago, Karoline countered. But the country changed and you didn't. You stayed in this room, protected by a script and a band and a crowd that was told when to clap. But out there, she gestured toward the invisible millions beyond the lens. Out there, the joke isn't funny anymore. It's just noise. The audience stirred. It wasn't the laughter Colbert lived for. It was a low, rising murmur of recognition. Someone in the third row nodded. Another person leaned over to whisper to their neighbor. The collective consciousness of the room was shifting, pulling away from the host and toward the guest who had dared to break the fourth wall of late-night arrogance. You people love playing the victim, Colbert said, his voice finally shedding its comedic lilt for a hard, defensive edge. Every joke is an attack. Every criticism is unfair. You come onto a comedy show and act like you're being led to the gallows because we dared to point out the absurdity of your rhetoric. It's a classic deflection, Karoline. If you can't defend the policy, attack the comedian. I'm not attacking the comedian, Steven, Karoline replied, her voice remaining at that same haunting, level pitch. You didn't mock a policy tonight. You mocked motive. You didn't challenge an argument. You questioned the very humanity and intelligence of the people who believe in it. That's not absurdity. That's narrative control. She leaned in, her shadow stretching across the desk, overlapping his. And the reason it didn't get the laugh you wanted, the reason the room feels the way it does right now, is because people are tired of being lectured by someone who pretends he isn't lecturing them. They're tired of the "it's just a joke" safety net. Colbert scoffed, a sharp, dry sound. I've been doing this for decades. I know my audience. I know what they want. You knew what they wanted 10 years ago, Karoline countered. But the country changed and you didn't. You stayed in this room, protected by a script and a band and a crowd that was told when to clap. But out there, she gestured toward the invisible millions beyond the lens. Out there, the joke isn't funny anymore. It's just noise. The audience stirred. It wasn't the laughter Colbert lived for. It was a low, rising murmur of recognition. Someone in the third row nodded. Another person leaned over to whisper to their neighbor. The collective consciousness of the room was shifting, pulling away from the host and toward the guest who had dared to break the fourth wall of late-night arrogance. You don't get to come onto my show and tell me how to do my job, Colbert snapped. The irritation was no longer a performance, it was raw. He was a king realizing the palace gates had been left unlocked. I'm not telling you how to do your job, Karoline said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled every corner of the theater. I'm telling you the cost of it. You built your brand on being the smartest person in the room, but tonight, the smartest people in the room are the ones who realized you're hiding. Colbert's jaw tightened. He looked toward the producer's table, his eyes searching for a lifeline, a signal to cut, a musical cue, anything to drown out the sound of his own credibility being dismantled. But the cameras stayed on them, the red lights glowing like embers. The producers knew what the host didn't. This was the most watched moment in the show's history, and they couldn't turn away. We're going to a break, Colbert said abruptly, his voice tight.
He didn't wait for the teleprompter. He didn't give the audience a final witty remark. He just sat there, clutching his mug, as the band crashed into a frenetic, desperate melody. Karoline didn't move. She didn't look victorious. She looked resolved. As the lights dimmed for the commercial, she remained perfectly still, a calm center in the middle of a collapsing empire. The rhythm is broken, and the host is silenced. We are approaching the final chapter. Is this the end of late night as we know it? Leave a comment below with your verdict.
The stage is dark, but the conversation is just beginning. If you've followed this journey from the green room to the final reckoning, you know that the truth doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. Stay with us until the very end and let us know in the comments who truly won the night. The red light of the primary camera flickered out, but the air in the studio remained charged, heavy with the ozone of a burnt-out narrative. As the house band played a frantic, hollow upbeat to bridge the gap into the commercial break, the theater didn't feel like a place of celebration. It felt like a crime scene. Steven Colbert didn't look at Karoline. He didn't offer a polite, good set or a professional nod. He leaned toward his producer, his face a mask of cold agitation, whispering sharply while gesturing toward the monitors. He was a man trying to fix a leak in a dam that had already burst. Karoline Leavitt remained in her chair, her hands folded over the folder she had brought onto the stage. She watched him, not with malice, but with a quiet, clinical observation. She had done what she came to do. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't name-called, she had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had been so startling that the man in the glass had no choice but to look away. When the stage manager signaled the end of the taping, the audience didn't flood toward the exits in the usual boisterous rush. They lingered. They stood up slowly, many of them looking at the desk with a newfound skepticism, as if realizing for the first time that the floorboards were hollow. "We're clear," a voice called out. Karoline stood. Her heels clicked across the stage, a solitary, confident sound that pierced through the fading chords of the bass guitar. As she reached the wings, the same producer who had offered her an out earlier stood frozen, his clipboard forgotten in his hand. He didn't speak. There was nothing left in the script for this moment. Outside, the cool night air of New York City hit her like a benediction. The city was loud, chaotic, and real, a sharp contrast to the controlled, hermetically sealed world of the studio. Within minutes, the digital world began to catch fire. The clip didn't need a clickbait headline. The silence in the room spoke for itself. By the time Karoline reached her car, the narrative had already shifted. The questions being asked across social media weren't about her answers. They were about the host's questions. When did the joke become a shield? When did the satire become a lie? In his dressing room, Colbert sat before a wall of mirrors, the bright bulbs reflecting off his glasses. He looked at his reflection, the sharp suit, the perfectly styled hair, the persona of the smartest man in the room. But for the first time in 20 years, the room felt empty. The laughter he had relied on to validate his world had vanished, replaced by the one thing a comedian cannot survive, a question he couldn't laugh away. The show would go on, the lights would come back up tomorrow, and the teleprompter would provide new lines. But as Karoline's car pulled away into Manhattan's traffic, the lesson of the night remained etched into the cold stone of the theater. Comedy has power, but when that power is used to dodge the truth, the cost is the one thing no performer can afford to lose. The joke was over. The reckoning had begun. The story of "That Joke Cost You" serves as a powerful reminder that in an age of performance, authenticity remains the ultimate disruptor. When we stop laughing at the scripts we're given and start looking for the truth behind the punchline, the power dynamic shifts back to where it belongs, with the people. Thank you for watching this deep dive into a night that changed the narrative. If this story resonated with you, show your support for independent analysis. Like this video if you believe in holding power accountable. Share this story with someone who needs to see through the late-night smoke and mirrors. Comment below with the word truth if you're ready for more content that challenges the status quo.
Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter in our ongoing exploration of the real stories behind the headlines.